Um, Thanks, Greg. When I woke up this morning, I had Greensleeves by Vaughan Williams running around in my head. You know, that's sort of that music which won't leave you. Now I've got Daft Punk. It's perfect. So, anyway, risks associated with DC and member education. When I was putting this together, it was actually quite difficult not to get quite depressed. So I'm going to try not to depress you, particularly after the presentation that Greg's just given. I'm try not to depress you, but just to take perhaps Gary's children analogy, if this was a school report, it frankly could do better at the moment. We've got a problem child at the moment that we need to fix. And the idea behind this presentation is really this is not just a presentation, I've tried to prepare it as a bit of a reference point, a document where I've tried to list out the key areas of risk, the key areas of focus, the key aspects that we as an industry need to focus on to make sure that DC works. And hopefully by the end of it, you wouldn't have come to the conclusion that the whole lot needs to be nationalised, the whole lot needs to be passed over to the state, and the state needs to provide a pension for people, because that's really all they understand. But never mind, we'll crack on. So, thank you very much. So our overview is that, well, one of the issues we're dealing with is we've got a DB audience there. There's at the minute there are more assets within DB pension plans than in DC, although there are probably more DC members now than there are DB. But the real value is currently within DB arrangements. That will obviously change over time. The issue is that those DB members have been used to the idea of just a pension. Now they've got choice. Of course, we've mentioned it before, it's been a step change for DC arrangements. So what I've tried to do is, in terms of listing out the risks, I've tried to categorise them to what risks there are for members, employers, trustees, and then what risks apply for all of us across the board. So in terms of member risks, well, this really genuinely is a case of caveat emptor, buyer beware. You think of all the steps and the processes that we go through in terms of buying a house. We think in terms of a house is the most expensive asset that we have, then it's our car. And in fact, actually, for quite a lot of us, quite a lot of the people out there, pensions may trump at least one, possibly both of those, and possibly both combined. You think in terms, we think nothing of spending £750 or £1,000 on instructing a lawyer to buy and sell a house for us. And yet the idea of spending £750 to £1,000 on an IFA to advise us as to what we do with our pension, that's an absolute no-no. I'm not going to do that. So there's a real concern here that people are actually not appreciating their pensions as much, and the true value of their pensions as much as they might. Nothing new to us, but it's a key aspect for us as an industry to try and tackle. Employer risks, we'll come on to those. Many of these apply to employees and trustees as well, but I've tried to list them out and try to organise them so that we can focus on those and make it slightly easier. Trustee risks, we've heard already about good value and the second line of defence. Those are key points we need to address as well as the others. The key message here is that employers and trustees need to work together. This is not a them and us situation. Employers and trustees need to work together to make this work. And then, of course, we've got the risks for everybody. But let's get into these details. Freedom and choice is absolutely fantastic. The issue, though, is that the best choice is based on the one complete fundamental unknown, and that is how long are you going to need your money for in retirement. So the fundamental problem is that people have been given the choice but don't know the basis on which they need to make their own decision. So that's going to cause members to make difficult decisions and maybe make the wrong decision, and the biggest risk therefore is running out of money. Now, whether auto-enrolment, whether nudge economics is going to address that in terms of edging people up in terms of their contributions, who knows, only time will tell. But at the end of the day, what we don't want for DC in 20 years' time is merely to be another 5 years closer to Generation Y, Generation Z and Generation Rent retiring with no assets. That's what we must ensure that we avoid. Similarly, at the other end of the scale, the cautious, sensible, low-paid employee that scrimps and scrapes and squirrels away, they could find themselves actually at the wrong end of the scale of their means-tested benefits. They may actually find that they've scrimped and scraped all this time, and have done themselves out of hard-earned state benefits. Pensions-wise, the guidance guarantee, the point here is that members' expectations may not be met by the limitations that PensionsWise provides. It's obviously to get people started. It's not a definitive course of action. To me, there's a worry there in terms of what members are going to expect when they have their 45-minute phone call. If indeed they have their 45-minute phone call meeting online, whichever way they do it. The concern there is are members really going to gain from the 45-minute discussion what they hope to get out of it, and will they understand it? And will it help them overcome the negative perception of pensions? PensionsWise is full of good intent when one reads it. Actually, I think it reads quite well. It has been panned by some experts, 6,000 words of, in terms people never heard of, an avalanche of information. When I read it, actually, I didn't think it was too bad, frankly, although by the time I got to the end, it was a bit of a trudge, if I'm honest, and I can easily see members giving up long before that. Just think of the car that we drive. Do we know what a cam belt or a drive shaft or a carburettor or an exhaust manifold or a wishbone or a limited slip differential does? No, we don't, and yet we drive our cars every other day or every day. It's exactly the same with pensions. We're trying to give people a fantastic choice based on really a fundamental misunderstanding of how it probably works. With PensionsWise, surveys are there. 1 in 4 males will use the guidance guarantee. 1 in 10 females will use PensionsWise. Is that indicative of females being the more savvy consumer? We don't know. But at this stage, only the early 30% of all those age groups from 40 to 70 have spoken to anybody about their options, their potential options. Options that they've been aware of for the last 10 months. That's a remarkably low figure. Annuities. Another area of risk, or are they? Are they dead? Who knows? And there has much been said about annuities dying. However, in an Aon survey recently, over 70% of people wanted a safe, guaranteed, secure, steady income in retirement. So the annuity is dead, but long live the gift royal policy, the guaranteed income for the rest of your adult life policy. There you go, insurers, off you go, take it away. Do your worst. Next, default fund adequacy. We've heard already about whether there are going to be enough options within the default fund to cater for different age groups, different options on retirement. Flexibilities on offer. Well, there's 3 flexibilities, but actually making it slightly more simple, there are only actually 2 flexibilities the default fund needs to cater for. Cash and annuity are frankly broadly the same. They're both taken at the same time. The issue is how much of it is going to be taken in those forms. Drawdown expectations and requirements. Those members who actually understand drawdown, I don't know if you saw the recent advertisement on TV for the Which magazine, the free guide to your pension freedoms. People were interviewed and they were asked, do you know what drawdown means? I don't understand what drawdown means. I don't understand any of this. Clearly, obviously, an advertisement for the Which magazine, where after they've read it, it all became perfectly clear. But the key point here is that people within drawdown will want inflation protection. They'll want a sustainable income with, still invested in growth-seeking assets with capital preservation focus. Is your drawdown really going to be able to achieve that? Clearly, the charge gap's going to help, but can it be realistically provided? Okay, next, liberation and scans. A genuine concern. It's massively on the radar screen. We're all aware of it. But is enough actually being done to stop it? And it takes me back, all the way back to the 6th of April 1988, when Maggie Thatcher brought in the ability for members to opt out of pension plans. This was the pensions revolution, the introduction of personal pension plans, Maggie Thatcher's own freedom and choice. What was it followed by? The biggest mis-selling scandal you could have possibly had, which lasted about 20 years to be properly rolled out and solved. Now that wasn't heralded. We've got scams and liberation heralded already, but are we doing anything about it? Not really. And we're now about to release all these people onto the market, and to me it's a recipe for disaster. And the trouble is, members may not have the recovery that they had in respect of personal pensions when they could go to the Financial Services Authority. They may not have the recovery under liberation, particularly if it's a, quote, legal arrangement. Now, the Ombudsman has given some indications about how he may decide cases. Ombudsman cases are not binding on everybody else, they're only binding on the parties to the actual case. But the bottom line is the law trumps best interests. So if you've got a member who wants to take a transfer value and it's to a legal scheme and they're entitled to take a transfer value, there is nothing you can do to stop it. And that's the problem. Now, these insurance companies did all the right things from a moral perspective, but all for all the wrong reasons. They weren't actually able or shouldn't have made the transfers for various different legal reasons. The fact is they didn't make the transfers because they suspected there to be a scam and the member complained. In each case, the member was not actually entitled to make the transfer in any event. Happenstance. But mere suspicion, unfortunately, is not enough to actually prevent a transfer. And in the words of the Ombudsman, an individual's right to make what might be a life-changing mistake must take supremacy over the provider's obligation to help them not to. Hardly a satisfactory state of affairs. I'll skip over these in the interest of time because we've got a lot of slides to get through. So, DB to DC transfers, another area of risk. Again, harks back to the point about the best choice is based on a fundamental unknown. The best decision may be to stay in the DB scheme, but it isn't if you die and your spouse dies early. The best decision may be to actually take your cash out. That's a really great idea if you die and your spouse dies early. It may be a very bad idea if you both live to be 100, because you may well run out of money. The issue is individuals are going to make their decisions based on a complete unknown. It's going to be guesswork. So, what are the protections for the members? Well, they must take appropriate advice. Appropriate advice is advice from an IFA. Now, the point for schemes, we're going to be coming on to this in a little while, is how will trustees and employers know that they've taken that advice? Well, there are ways that can be provided, but all I know is that trustees and employers up and down the country are going to be running to their lawyers asking for release, drafting very tight release letters for these members to sign every time a DB transfer is made to a DC arrangement. Mis-selling, that's in the eyes of both the insurance company that seeks to provide one of their products, also potentially for employers in terms of their communications, a key point which we'll touch upon. Tax implications. Individuals taking their cash lump sum, hopefully the scheme will deduct the tax before it's paid out, and therefore the individual receives the net. But in many cases, the example we have here, is if an individual takes his 50,000 pot, uses it to pay off his mortgage, when he fills in his personal tax return, at the end of the year, he's going to find himself having to calculate a cheque for £15,000 payable to HMRC. Does that individual have enough money to be able to do that? Plus, he's unwittingly reduced his annual allowance from 40 down to £10,000. What will it mean for employers? Well, we've mentioned earlier the end of pensions. Will people be unable to retire? Will it mean actually more engaged workers? That's a positive. The need for financial education, we've heard that earlier quite brilliantly from Greg. I have to say I've been a complete supporter of the Life Academy. Financial education is absolutely fundamental, I believe, and the way we do it is we start right now in the workplace. Moving on. The exposure to bankrupt octogenarians, the employee mindset. Joe or Josephine on the shop floor, on the assembly line, DB scheme, my pension's taken care of. DC arrangements, I'm worried about it. I don't really understand it. Have I got enough money? Does the employer really want to have a preoccupied employee? They understand their house is their pension, they understand their ISAs, but pensions are complicated. In the comms, will members engage? The point well made earlier by Greg was that we need to really engage in the way that employees understand, not merely telling your lawyer to draft you an announcement letter, which has one key focus: make sure that I, the employer, or the trustees are not sued. Is that my time up thing? No, maybe not. Okay. Next thing is what should employers say? Clearly, the point is how much should employers say? Be careful how much you say. Be careful between overdoing it and moving into promotion versus just information, leaving yourself exposed to risk. And I'll be coming on a little bit later to the IBM risk. Another employer risk is that individuals may select against a scheme. If you're single, you smoke, you might have a long life expectancy, take it out, transfer it out. Will this actually mean DB liability is increasing? Does it mean actually further encouragement for investment scams? We'll have to see. And the government is also now consulting on enabling DB members to access the benefits on a DC basis, but without the necessity to transfer out. Yet another flexibility to allow members to be able to access their pensions without moving to a DC arrangement if their employers offer it. There's another risk, change in law. The IBM case raised the idea of something called reasonable expectations. It's a new concept, but members may be given reasonable expectations about their retirement income. Are we going to see, therefore, a concern of IBM drift? Again, employers looking towards their communications with one key aspect in mind, which is make sure I'm not going to get sued. Is that really helpful for the members? Next is trustee duties and the new flexibilities. Well, at the end of the day, the trustees have the flexibility to introduce these arrangements into their own plans. Now, woe betide the trustee that doesn't consult with the employer before doing so, but it is ultimately the trustees' power to be able to introduce it into their plans. Or can they refuse? Can they refuse to do so? Is it too difficult for us to do it? Is that a reasonable excuse? It's too dangerous. Is that too patronising to the members? Well, our view is that it is a sufficient discharge for trustees of their duties to not offer the arrangements under their scheme, but to offer a transfer out instead, particularly with all the unknowns that we've got floating around at the moment, not least second line of defence requirements as well, which we've yet to see from TPR and the DWP. Administrative changes. We heard earlier in terms of pensions-wise. Pensions-wise is a bit of guidance telling the member where to go next. Where to go next? Your pension plan. Who's that? It's the trustees. So the trustees are going to be the next port of call after pensions-wise, hence the requirement for second line of defence. These are seismic changes for trustees to have to cater for, and it's less than 2 months away. Sorry, just over 2 months away. So we're less than 2 months away if you take out the weekends and the bank holiday. So, next thing, good value. Chairmen of the trustees, you've been aware of this for quite some time. You must put in your annual statement a statement as to whether or not your arrangements represent good value. There's been a lot of debate about what good value actually means. Will it be inaccurate in the member's eyes? Will the member say, aha, I've got a piece of paper here which my chairman says this scheme is good value for me, but it hasn't been good value for me, and I can readily prove that it's not been good value for me. Is that all I'm going to get in my pension plan? I'll see you in court. And off he toddles to the Ombudsman, a free legal service as far as the members are concerned. Now, they may not be successful at the Ombudsman, but an employer and trustee have got to go to the massive expense and time and hassle of having to defend an Ombudsman claim. Second line of defence, really second line of protection is probably a better phraseology. Now, if you look at the FCA's guidance that's going to be issued to providers, it's all about risk warnings. It's not a replication of pensions-wise, and the DWP and TPR, in terms of their second line of defence, will not be a duplication of the FCA warnings, so one has to see how that's going to pan out. But that is a real change. That's an enormous change. Default funds are mentioned earlier. Again, just as much an issue for trustees as it is for members. Risks for us all are politicians. They can't stop meddling. And what have we got in 2 months' time? We've got a flipping general election. 3 months' time, we've got a general election. We could have another load of changes. It's really quite depressing. But before you reach your Prozac, let's just deal with the issues that we've got at the moment. Regulatory rush. Actually, truth be told, this is actually better than where we were in 2005 before the introduction of the regulations that govern the rules under the Pensions Act 2004 and the Finance Act 2004. We're in a much better place because at least we've got sight of draft regs. Quite a long time. Before the 04 Act, Pensions Act 04 came into effect, on the 5th of April, precious little had been issued and it was going to become effective the next day. market conditions, we are throwing our ill-educated, weakest part of our society, our members, onto a market which has just suffered a 1 in 200 year event. Is that really a sensible thing? We've just seen annuity illustrations for next year 15% more expensive because of gilt yields dropping, when everybody said they couldn't drop any further. The issue is unpredictability. When I was at school, I was taught economics, and I was taught by the teacher that it's rather like driving a car when you can only see through the rear view mirror. Well, pensions is a bit like economics, but just add signposts and remove reverse gear, ultimately. However, the one piece of good news that I've got is I've got one solution to all of this that was encapsulated by Winston Churchill. Okay, that's all. There are more slides in there. We were asked as a firm to provide, by the NAPF, to provide 100 known unknowns. Without giving away all of our know-how, I've included about 35 of them just to give you a taster of what else is out there that we've identified we don't know about. Thank you very much.